So that makes you the indisposable number 7.
No, the book doesn't cover much at all. Just what the Keyblade I gave to Luxu sees. And even then, only the bits important enough to jot down.
I found one just yesterday. Mar something. Still, Sora, that doesn't mean you should change. Accept the power you're given. Find the hearts joined to yours.
Must have seen a lot of darkness.
Ever since Luxu was deemed the true traitor by the Master, I have been looking at his actions with a very firm eye, and any time he seems to do things on his own accord. Luxu seemed to half deviate from the task he was given by the Master, while at the same time seemed to always stay loyal to his word. This is extremely perplexing, as it's unclear whose side Luxu is on and where his loyalties lie, and frankly this even leaves open the question of what side does everyone belong to. We also need to look firmly at different moments of Luxu / Xigbar during Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, Kingdom Hearts 2, and Kingdom Hearts 3, because I think there is something to look at in all of these games, as maybe it'll help us understand where the series is going forward, at least where Luxu is concerned. It's pretty clear that Luxu cares a great deal for the Union leaders and wants to make sure that they are all okay. We see him straight up plead with the Master repeatedly about possible solutions for the Union leaders, and he doesn't like the idea of just leaving them to slumber in Daybreak Town. He also doesn't like the idea of leaving the Union leaders alone, since they will face darkness, and he holds them as very valuable since they are responsible for rebuilding the world after its ruin. While the Master tasked Luxu with observing the Union leaders, since he knew Luxu would hold them in such high regard, he made sure to tell Luxu to not get involved at all and to not get his hands dirty. But Luxu not only directs a Dandelion down a certain path by sending the true Dandelion out, we also see him directly talk to Brain and causes this to happen. Yeah, I still don't know what's going on here. But Luxu is clearly making the Union leaders a top priority, so much so he would directly disobey the Master's orders. And it's these instances that gets him dubbed the traitor. Considering that practically every time Luxu seems to disobey the Master, it regards the Union leaders. And I even noticed something. Luxu seemed to have been directly involved with each Union leader in helping them out, probably ensuring that they live on after the Keyblade War that Xehanort enacts. Out of the 5 Union leaders, we know he was directly involved with at least 3, and we can make assumptions about the 4th and the 5th one. Luxu was the one that recruited Marluxia into the organization. Luxu was also the one that freed Skuld, if Skuld is Subject X, from a cell in Radiant Garden, and we also see Luxu deal with Brain and send him into the future with one of the pods. We can also probably assume that he has done something with Ephemer, like say assisting him build Scala at Kylum. We can probably also assume that Luxu has worked with Ephemer in preparing for Brain's arrival in the future, because Sigurd claims that they already knew that Brain was going to arrive in the future after escaping Daybreak Town's destruction. But the only person to have possibly known that Brain jumped forward in time with a pod was Luxu, because he was the one that sent him forward. And there's also the fact that Luxu had passed down his Keyblade to one of the 5. However, that was something that the Master had tasked him to do, but the point still stands that Luxu is getting extremely involved with assisting the Union leaders. The only one we don't see or can guess that he gets involved with is Strelitzia, and it makes sense. Luxu didn't even know that she was killed. Now, it's possible that some of Luxu's actions can be linked to Strelitzia. First, let me talk about one of the 2 elephants in the room in regards to Strelitzia. No, I do not believe that the hooded figure with the white robe Strelitzia is Luxu. I think it's the Master. We need to consider that we have never seen Luxu in the data world, and around the same time Elrena and her Cherokee saw them in Data Daybreak Town, Luxu was hauling the true dandelion in the real world. So what did Luxu do to affect Strelitzia? It's tough to say for certain considering our very limited exposure to Strelitzia, especially after her death. We can guess that at some point Luxu does meet Strelitzia, considering the passage from the secret reports where he says, "I will meet the 5 once more." This tells me that he has met all 5 of them at some point, but it couldn't have been before Union Cross's ending, considering that he didn't even know Strelitzia was struck down, and if he already knew her, he would have asked for her by name when talking to Brain. As far as when exactly did Luxu meet her, it's tough to say. And in regards to did Luxu help her, it's easier to say that the Master was more involved with Strelitzia, since we can deduce it was him that was with her in Data Daybreak Town, and we can guess he is one of the hooded figures we see in Kingdom Hearts 4's first trailer, making him one of only 4 people to be in the trailer excluding Donald and Goofy, and one of those 4 being Strelitzia. I think the best way to look at this is that Luxu was protecting and preparing the Union leaders that survived past the Keyblade War, and the Master's looking after the one that didn't. So it's possible that, like I said in the previous theory, Strelitzia's heart was preserved and sent to Quadratum, where her heart could live on without risk until the time is right. Now, I have attempted to solve where Strelitzia went in a past theory, and while it still may be plausible, especially given the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer, I need to consider an excerpt from one of Luxu's secret reports, where he says, "But I will continue gazing upon each passing era, one onto the next, in time, be it years or decades, centuries or millennia. I will meet the 5 once more." I know the argument can be made that he's talking about the foretellers here, considering we know he reunites with them in Kingdom Hearts 3, and he was expecting Ava to arrive, so he was expecting all 5. But if you look at the entire secret reports, Luxu was talking about just the Union leaders. He refers to them as the 5 when discussing them leaving into the world line, so it makes sense that he is referring to them again as the 5 when he is talking about meeting them once more. That means that all 5 Union leaders will reappear and reunite again. And based on what we know at least 3 of them are currently active. Marluxia we know will be recompleted as Lauriam after his defeat in Kingdom Hearts 3. If Skuld is Subject X, we know she is still out and about in the worlds somewhere, considering that the secret report she wrote was more than likely written around the same time Kingdom Hearts 3 took place, which is only 10 years after she escaped her cell. And we know Strelitzia is still active, but is in Quadratum thanks to the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. That only leaves Ephemer, who we do see in Kingdom Hearts 3, but in a weird spirit form only Sora could see, and Brain, whose whereabouts and conditions are currently unknown. And speaking of those 2, these are right now the only 2 Union leaders whose fates are up in the air. My initial assumption about both of them is that they both at some point died. Ephemer dying of old age after rebuilding Scala, and Brain also dying of old age after having a family. But thanks to the secret report that I have read again, I know that these 2 will appear again along with the other 3 Union leaders. We now have to try and figure out their fate. So let's first tackle Ephemer. After Union Cross, the only thing we know involving Ephemer is that he built Scala at Kylum after his lifeboat had failed to travel him further into the future, and we know this considering that we see him get out of his lifeboat. If he succeeded in time jumping with his pod, then his lifeboat would have been gone just like everyone else's. It's definitely possible that Ephemer was still around when Brain arrived in Scala at Kylum, but that's not what's important. What's important is the lifeboat. It was stated that the lifeboats were originally meant to serve as a means of traveling to different worlds, and the ones we see in Union Cross are incomplete prototypes, which is why they can help someone travel into the future. We know that they eventually get completed, as Xehanort was able to use one of them to send Kairi to Destiny Island. And it's important to note that since Ephemer still has his, it's possible that he he could have completed it with help. We know that Luxu knows how the lifeboats work and know what they are. It's tough to say whether or not he knows how to build them, but considering Ephemer was able to build all of Scala from what remained of Daybreak Town, it's not hard to believe that Ephemer and Luxu are capable of reverse engineering. Ephemer is most definitely working with Luxu, which will help send him into the future to what we consider to be the present. Now, tackling Brain, I'm not even gonna attempt to solve this scene in particular, but I will talk about Brain and Scala. We know that Brain spends some time there, seeing him in the Missing Link trailer. The thing is, if it is true that Brain is Ericus' grandfather, and we know that Ericus is a descendant of a Union leader given what Nomura said and what's written about him by Xehanort in the Secret Report, we don't know much about what happens to Brain. According to Ericus, his grandfather had battled darkness, but Ericus claimed that he has no idea what happened to him. It's actually interesting that he cuts Baldur off because Baldur was going to suggest that that's how Ericus' grandfather died. But Ericus didn't let him finish, which makes it clear that no one knows what happened to him. This is of course if we take what Ericus says at face value, because we know from scenes in Dark Road and Kingdom Hearts 3 during Ericus and Xehanort's childhood that he knows way more than he lets on or is willing to let others know. But one thing is for certain is that Brain is not dead based on what we have seen and heard. Brain could have taken another lifeboat, as we know thanks to Melody and Memory that more will be eventually made, and could have jumped forward in time. He could have even jumped to Unreality where Strelitzia went. There's a lot of different things that could have happened to Brain. Part of me wants to believe that Brain probably jumped forward in time since that's the only thing that makes sense, at least at first, but I also think that Brain may have made his way to Quadratum. Brain suddenly disappearing to Quadratum would explain why Ericus claims to not know what happened to him. Brain could have also used one of the pods, since we know that the completed pods can be used more than once, considering that we see Kairi use one of the pods in Melody and Memory, and we see that there's 5, and in Kingdom Hearts 1, which is 9 years later, there's still 5. Also in Melody and Memory, Yensid talked about how it was shared to him during his Keyblade training that the ancient Keyblade masters had traveled between worlds like Quadratum. And not only that, but Yensid tasked Mickey with investigating Scala at Kylum, as it may be connected to the Keyblade masters. A place we know Brain spent some time in, along with Ephemer, who was the one that built it. And speaking of which, so there's a lot to say about Missing Link story-wise, and there's a few things we can pull from when it comes to the trailer. First off, the fact that Brain is in the trailer and the fact that Sigurd is the narrator lets us know that the game takes place shortly after Union Cross's last cutscene. I think this game will show us what happened to Brain after you arrived in Scala, and it may even explain some other things. But there is something really important I want to take note of from the trailer. It is the part where Luxu shows up. If this is Luxu. Does anyone else notice what Luxu does here? He's covering the gazing eye of the Keyblade. Luxu is making sure that the master can't take note of what's happening here in this era. This is supported by both the words at the beginning of the trailer saying an unwritten era, and the fact that the game is called Missing Link. The title is probably a hint that the events of the game will be a missing unwritten link in the known lore of the Kingdom Hearts universe that the master didn't write down. Remember, the master can only write down what he actually sees from the eye.
No, the book doesn't cover much at all. Just what the Keyblade I gave to Luxu sees. And even then, only the bits important enough to jot down.
So by him saying this, we know that the master is very much willing to pass over events that don't hold much merit and don't tell him much of anything. So what is Luxu trying to hide? It is still fairly early to try and guess what Luxu is trying to hide, but I get the feeling that it is something to do with Brain and the lifeboats that he will make. It is possible that the master wouldn't want more lifeboats to be made, since he probably fears that there could be a calamity that could come from it. But Luxu has a job to do and will see it through no matter what. So what does that leave us with the rest of this theory? Two people who can definitely seem like outsiders to all of this are Sora and Ventus. Ventus wasn't even a Union leader and may not even be a dandelion, and he's the reason why Strelitzia is where she is now, and Sora wasn't even around in that era. However, I get the feeling that these two will be involved with the coming conflicts involving darkness. I feel like these two have the ability to keep up with darkness and destroy darkness if push comes to shove. First, we know that Ventus is a being of light, and we saw him easily dispel darkness in the form of the darklings that were around him. Ventus can more than likely use his ability as a light being to help dispel the darkness. Now, when looking at Sora, it's harder for me to pull anything into light like Ventus being a light being. We do know that Luxu has something in store for Sora based on his conversation with him in Olympus, as well as looking at some of the inner dialogue from Luxu based off his character files for Kingdom Hearts 3. So, what is going to happen to Sora? It's tough to say, but I've suggested before that Sora will inherit a great power or something that is definitely in relation to fighting the darkness, otherwise Xigbar wouldn't go out of his way to try and talk to Sora. Not to mention, we know that the crown chess piece represents Sora, and that was a piece set up in Ericus's new game. So now that we have an established 7 people who Luxu has dealt with and could assist him, where does that leave us? So now I think it's important to look at what exactly is going to happen with these characters involving Luxu and what is the plan here. I think the plan is obviously to help combat the darkness. First step was to make sure that all the Union leaders were preserved or kept alive to the present day regardless of what's happening with the rest of the world. After that, the second step would be to summon the foretellers to the present after the Keyblade War concludes. After that, I think the next step would be transferring the 7 darknesses that the Master spoke of and place them inside of himself and the 6 students, and we know that for a fact that that is a part of the Master's plan. After this, I think the next step would be having the 5 Union leaders, Ventus and Sora, gain enough power to destroy the darkness. I'm confident that part of the plan is to kill the people that are vessels with the darkness inside of them, as without doing that, the darkness could live on easily no matter what, as we see with Ventus, and based on dialogue with darkness and the player, if the host dies while darkness is inside of it, darkness will also die. And we know that the new game Ericus showed puts a white crown piece, Sora, up against 7 black foreteller pieces, which obviously foretells a battle between the 7 Union leaders of light and the 7 foretellers of darkness. This theory definitely holds some weight based on what's happening, and I'm pretty sure we will receive some hint or revelation with Missing Link. Moving forward, we will need to ask ourselves these questions. Why did Luxu help out each Union leader? And what will become of Sora in the darkness? And what is the desired outcome of the Master's true goal? Well, thank you so much everyone for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you guys rate, comment, and subscribe. Check out my Twitter and my Twitch and my Discord. This has been Noir Low Bomber, and I'm out.